mobility policies, name it. But these are the things that public policies and institutions, legal system needs to do. The third thing I would say, the private sector. I think at this moment, public and private is a very fine line, and particularly in your world, is a fine line that we cannot disconnect one to the other. So I think private sector needs to be, and it should be interested to really have diversity and inclusion in their teams. Should be interested, and why not? And we need to understand is because we have always the usual suspect, is because the way we look at things and the way private sector look at things have not opened to look at all the variety of people working on those areas, is because we don't have visibility as women, is because we don't have parrainage, we don't have somebody that really, we don't have a network, what it is, because these are things that makes more difficult to access. It's true also that women, we need to learn to work with money. And I think that sometimes for women, because I think historically we have not been very close to money, for us it's more complex, I think, to think about asking money for us and our projects. And while men do not have any doubt, we are constantly, when it comes to money, we have a lot more doubts. And in that sense, we need to be familiar with money. We need to be familiar how financial flows, how financial system operates. And it may be something simple, but for us, it's something that it really is not something in general. Of course, women are different, all of us, but it's not something that's attractive to us. And the point is that the fact that it's not attractive, that we have not been able to maneuver well with the financial system, it makes more difficult to be where we should be to ask for this funding, for this capital that we need for startups, we need for projects, we need for many things. The fourth thing I want to do is we need to meet, particularly I would say in health, meet the demand and the supply. And I think that in many cases, most of the time, I don't know how much we affect, but I remember the case of Ebola. I remember some of the cases where the supply side, puts a lot of investment, the hospitals, big thing, take a lot of infrastructure to support, to eliminate diseases. But the problem is that nobody was taking care of what was happening in the homes. What happens, the lack of mobility of many members of the citizenship, like half of the population in many countries of women. And at the end of the day, this is not part of the equation of the strategy or the tactics of many of the science, research, innovation, and particularly health. So I think we need to understand how health systems particularly operates in a country, in a context, by which also we have to meet with the demand. And I think the demand side, women in many cases do not have the ability, the possibility, or the opportunity to talk with researchers, do not have the possibility to explain what are the problems, what are the solutions, what they should be doing. And I think I will encourage all of you to really look at when you do something, okay, you are the supply or the health system, the research system, the innovation systems, the technical people are the supply side, but look at the demand. Look at how men and women are also are looking things differently, and how this is important, because that will really bring another perspective for your eyes. And I think this is also part of gender equality. I think health is very clear when we see, and I'm sure you know more than me, when we see what are the symptoms, how health systems are applicable or are looking at the human beings, are looking at particularly a man in their 30s, 35, whatever, but never had any look at the demand side of women, and particularly in the most vulnerable groups of women. And I think this, from my side, I think you should also look at that, because that will really make your work more aligned to the realities of the problem. And this is a huge problem nowadays. For instance, women are now getting into the health market, if I may say. My last post was in Tunisia and Libya in the middle of COVID. And in Tunisia, we had 50% of the doctors were women. But very interestingly, all these doctors mainly were in the public sector. So also, it was a completely different situation. What is happening when women get into majority or more than a majority in a sector? And this is something you have to really look at for this generation and next generation. Is that's something because suddenly the pay gaps, suddenly the salaries start to go down. The moment women get into a sector, the moment the pay gaps, the salary gap, the wage gap, it's bigger, these professions have lower salary. And this is all over. But in the health system, is happening constantly. And I think this is part of the problem. And I suggest you also, even though you think that it doesn't have to do nothing with your work, you have to look at that very clearly. The moment women enter massively into a profession, the moment by different reasons, these salaries start to go down, or the appreciation or the relevance is going down, or they are put it in more in the public systems because whatever. And I'm not saying because the public systems are amazing, but we are seeing what are happening now in the public system. The COVID pandemic has shown us that, at least in Europe, we thought that they were okay, we didn't have to invest. And now suddenly we are realizing that, oh, just a minute, where are we going? Here there is a problem. I will not get into more to that, but just for you to take into consideration.
And just to jump in, we're running a little bit short on time, so we may have to
sorry. I will say 3 more things, and that's it. Is the care, the care, the whole issue of care, parenting, family, conciliation of the world of production, reproduction. You have to reconcile this. The 6th thing is the gender stereotypes and social norms. We could dedicate one day, entire day to that. And the last but not least is data. We still have a lot of missing data in relation to women's participation in science, technology, and innovation. So here are my 7 points. You cannot work on one and not on the other. And this should not be work as usual, should be acceleration of this work and these different interventions, because if not, we are not getting, and painfully slow is not a possibility in the world we live now. Over to you, and really sorry because of this tension.
No problem. I think we could spend a day on each of the 7 topics. Absolutely agree with you. And thank you for this. These 7 points are going to anchor our conversation and our panel discussion today. I'm particularly struck by what you said about women needing more networks, and even thinking about the uphill challenges for inclusion of women in science, but then also women in finance. And then you combine the two, it might be a double uphill battle. And we have to think of all the things. So thank you so much for helping to kick us off, for anchoring today's conversation. We're sorry you can't stay for the panel and the Q&A, but we know you've got a very busy schedule. So thanks for dialing in. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day. We're going to switch gears now to our panel discussion. Each of our panelists will give a short presentation, and I might have to cut you off. We do want to make sure we save enough time for the interactive discussion toward the end of the meeting. Before we dive into that, well, just a reminder that if you're tweeting along, don't forget to use the hashtag #GenderGap. And I will first welcome of the panelists, Katja Reppel, head of the Unit of Democracy and European Values from the European Commission, Directorate General for Research and Innovation, the unit that promotes, among others, gender equality, diversity in research and innovation policy. We're also very delighted as we welcome her I'd like to show a nice message we received today before we turn to Katja from Maria Gabriel, the European Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education, and Youth, who wanted to send a message, couldn't be with us today, but send this message ahead of the webinar and just touch base on this briefly. Great, we have it on the screen. Again, just a few thoughts, and there will be a longer message that we can share in the chat, but a note that a stronger gender lens on PRNDs, as set out in the study commissioned by DSW, is critical for achieving health equity and impact, and highlights the need for gender-sensitive and gender-responsive approaches in fighting PRNDs, poverty-related neglected diseases. Gender equality is a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. It is at the heart of our international cooperation in science, technology, and innovation with partners worldwide. And through Horizon Europe, the European Union stands for a more inclusive and gender equal culture within R&I organizations, integrating a gender perspective in funded R&I actions. So again, a perfect framing as we introduce her colleague Katja. And Katja, over to you. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, and delighted to be here with you. And thank you, Begonia, for the inspiring kickoff that you gave. And you will notice that a good number of the points you made, I'm going to echo. So my name is Katja Reppel. I have the pleasure to be the head of unit for democracy and European values in the Director General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. And in my unit, I have a sector that is in charge of developing the policy strategy of the European Commission for gender equality in research and innovation. And just to note, the European Commission has introduced in my field of work several ambitious policies. Let me just stress 3 of them. And I see Marcella smiling because she is behind a lot of them. The 3 main avenues that we are pursuing is gender balance in research and innovation, systemic change in research and innovation institutions, and last but not least, as my commissioner, Mrs. Gabriel, referred to, getting a gender dimension into the research and innovation substance. Just a couple of words on these 3 elements. Begonia quoted some statistics worldwide in terms of women in science and research. In the European Union, we're a little bit better, but not terribly better. There's still large gaps, frankly speaking. Our She Figures monitoring report that shows that women still represent less than 1/3 of doctoral graduates in engineering, manufacturing, and construction, and less than 1/4 in the ICT area. And just as Begonia said, this gap widens as the seniority levels increase, with women holding only 18% of full professorship positions in engineering and technology in the European Union. And challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic threaten to widen this gap in science further. During the peak of the pandemic, we saw a significant drop in journal submissions and publications by women researchers due to the disproportionate share of care responsibilities at home that fell on women. Surprise, surprise. Also, unfortunately, gender-based violence is an issue. Begonia made me think of that when noting that women are leaving the scientific careers. Women are particularly affected by sexual violence and harassment, also in the research and academic institutions, which some people don't take particularly seriously, but it happens. And unfortunately, the prevalence of gender-based violence in academia is highest among researchers with disabilities, with an ethnic minority background, or non-binary persons. This is unacceptable. We cannot afford losing out on researchers' talent because they're driven out of academic careers due to a hostile working environment. Is really something we need to address. But making research careers more attractive and inclusive for women, particularly from marginalized background, requires systemic change. And that brings me to the second point. The systemic change in research and innovation institutions. With Horizon Europe, the current European Union framework program for funding research and innovation, we support a gender equal culture within research and innovation organizations. And as of last year's, public bodies, research organizations, and higher education institutions established in the European Union member states or associated countries need to have in place a gender equality plan in order to be eligible to get Horizon Europe funding. In brief, no gender equality plan, no cash. And that point speaks to people. Gender equality plans have been proven to be one of the most transformative tools to achieve long-term sustainable advancement towards gender equality in research and innovation. And these type of plans are not new. The concept was introduced already a decade ago in a communication of the European Commission on the European research area. And we were funding a whole lot of projects under the different research framework programs that support the setup or the implementation of such plans. We will soon publish a study that looks into the impact of gender equality plans on research and equality in research innovation. And there's also forthcoming on the 8th of March, the award of a Gender Equality Champions Award, where those institutes that have already shown that they have excellent gender equality plans will be highlighted. That brings me to the third and last point of my short introduction, and that's about getting a gender dimension into research and innovation substance. The integration of a gender dimension into all research and innovation actions that are funded under Horizon Europe is by now mandatory by default. There can be certain exceptions, but by and large, it has to be in. And embedding sex and gender-based analysis into all fields of research and innovation and adopting an inclusive approach that considers intersecting social categories such as ethnicity, age, or disability is a matter of producing excellent research to the benefit of all citizens across the world. Studies highlighting the need for gender-sensitive and gender-responsive approaches, like the poverty-related and neglected diseases through a gender lens, are really instrumental in that regard. And I would like to close here, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Katja. I know I already have a bunch of questions for you. We'll come back to those in a few minutes after we hear from our other panelists. Next up, I'd like to introduce Lisa Gerlitz, head of DSW's Brussels office, a global health NGO working on sexual and reproductive health and rights and global health research and innovation. Also noting they are our organizers and our hosts for today. So thanks for bringing us all together, Lisa. Hot off the press, DSW has published today an update of its poverty-related neglected diseases through a gender lens study. So Lisa, tell us about your new study. What's out today? What's the news? What are the key recommendations?
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for introducing the acronym before. PRNDs, poverty-related and neglected diseases, include HIV and AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, and neglected tropical diseases, such as schistosomiasis or dengue. And 2.8 billion people are affected globally. Poverty increases the chances of developing these diseases, and these diseases can increase poverty. It's a vicious cycle. These diseases are also neglected in the sense that they affect neglected populations, and because there is a lack of private sector interest in investing into research and innovation for new and improved health tools and technologies, which are unfortunately urgently needed because even the most basic tools are missing for most of these diseases. Next slide, please. I don't see the next slide. I don't know if now we do. Thank you. When looking at global prevalence, this snapshot shows that there can be considerable difference in prevalence rates between males and females. Disproportionate prevalence arises from differences in both biological susceptibility, but also from broader gender dimensions of PRNDs, such as different exposure due to prescribed gender roles and activities, such as taking care of livestock, for example. Next slide, please. When we look regionally, we can see a more nuanced picture. Here we've taken the example of HIV and AIDS, but you can see this analysis for other diseases in the study as well. We can see that in sub-Saharan Africa, the prevalence is considerably higher in females. We can also see a differentiated picture per age group. And this is an important consideration, that age as well as other stratifiers should be considered together in an intersectional approach to overcome disparities in health and other fields as well. And Katja mentioned this before as well. So I think we all agree on the importance of intersectionality. Next slide, please. While prevalence is of course relevant and females generally tend to be at higher risk of disease, one of the key considerations that we present in the study is the importance to consider impact beyond just prevalence and to consider broader gender dimensions beyond just the biological sex. What do we mean by this? Women and girls are particularly affected in terms of prevalence, but not only on a physical, reproductive, sexual, economic level, but also social and emotional levels. This disproportionality arises from both biological factors and broader gender dimensions, such as existing power relations and prescribed roles in society that then have an impact on the consequences of disease. Let me give a few examples on the next slide, how PRNDs intersect with both sex and gender. The perception of a disease as a male disease, such as in the case of tuberculosis, because of its higher prevalence in males, has shown to negatively influence women's health-seeking behavior and can potentially lead to them being misdiagnosed. Women face cultural, financial, and other barriers in accessing testing. In some cases, and that's not just the case for TB testing, diagnostic tests are developed in a gender-blind way, meaning they do not accurately detect disease in women. The prevalence of disease, especially in women, may be underreported, especially for diseases affecting hidden body parts that may be related to social taboos, with women delaying or even avoiding seeking treatment altogether. Such is often the case for female genital schistosomiasis, which currently requires a visual examination of the cervix and the vaginal wall to accurately diagnose. Female genital schistosomiasis presents with symptoms similar to sexually transmitted infections, which can lead to women being wrongfully accused of sexual promiscuity, which in some communities can have serious ramifications, including gender-based violence and social exclusion. In the case of malaria, despite actually balanced prevalence rates globally, morbidity between sexes differs, with pregnant females at greater risk of malaria and the added complication of placental malaria. Furthermore, malaria, but also other diseases, as we've heard in both previous interventions on the panel, actually can pose a gender burden on women who often take up caregiving activities. So as Katja mentioned, for example, the fact that publications by female researchers dropped during the COVID pandemic. And women may even commonly postpone their own treatment in order to give priority to other sick family members. Next slide, please. These differences in prevalence and in impact are not considered in research and innovation. Clinical development for health tools is still today male-centric. Many studies do not report on sex or explore the role of sex as a biological variant, let alone considering the gendered implications or broader social considerations. There are a few examples here on the slide. But we can move to the next and final slide, which is our summary graphic, where you can see how sex and gender need to be considered at every single stage of the research and innovation process. And our study, of course, looks at poverty-related neglected diseases, but this model can be applied, of course, across disciplines and medical research in general, for sure. And it, of course, only serves as a starting point to inspire action and is by no means exhaustive. We have set out 8 recommendations in the study, which I'm also happy to discuss further in the Q&A session because I'm running out of time. But just to mention a few, integrate both female and male sex in all phases of research and development, consider broader dimensions of diseases through a more holistic approach to research and innovation, include women susceptible to and becoming pregnant in clinical development, adopt a gender-sensitive approach in medical regulation and international regulatory harmonization efforts, foster greater representation of women in science because they will take care for these recommendations to be implemented. And last but not least, consider all people beyond the binary focus on males and females, because it's very difficult to get any data and understanding of how diseases affect and impact people beyond the binary spectrum, let's say. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Lisa. Putting a human face on some of the statistics and the recommendations we've just seen and heard, we'd like to watch, and just pause here briefly, watch a snippet from a video put out from Medicines for Malaria Ventures recently, which just really focuses on what it means to exclude certain populations from research innovation. So quick snippet here. Are we able to pull that up?
Yes, video is on its way.
The suspense builds.
Every woman deserves to live her pregnancy without the fear of getting malaria.
Each year, about 125 to 130 million pregnancies occur in areas where malaria occurs, and the consequences can be disastrous for the mother and for the unborn child. So you can lose the pregnancy, resulting in stillbirth or miscarriage. Or if the pregnancy itself survives, the child's often born smaller than it should be, so with low birth weight or too early, preterm. And that in turn places the child at risk in the first year of life.
I developed malaria 2 times during the pregnancy. The baby was not playing well. You couldn't feel the baby in the womb. Even the doctors, when they were checking, they could not feel the baby. I thought the baby will pass or the baby will die in the womb. They proposed that the baby should be removed for the safety of the mother and also the baby. Baby Elizabeth was born with 1050 grams prematurely. She was a premature baby.
Pregnant and lactating women are underserved by currently available curative and preventive therapies, especially in the first trimester of pregnancy.
If she's in her first trimester, which is the most sensitive time when a baby is still being formed, we're quite careful about the type of drugs that we give. If a mom comes with malaria, you want to know that the drug that you're going to give is safe. The options we have are quite few, especially in first trimester, that have been confirmed by the World Health Organization to be safe.
Pregnant and lactating women are generally excluded from research and clinical studies for fear of causing harm. So when a new drug is registered, basically we don't know whether it is safe for them or whether it is efficacious for them. And to address these questions, it can take up to 2 decades of evidence gathering. And we want to change that.
It's important to include women in clinical trials because we need to find drugs and products that are safe for them, that are efficacious for this particular population of women. When we do clinical trials in populations that actually need it, then we are adhering to the principle of justice.
what needs to change.
Thanks. We'll pause there. The link to the full video is in the chat. If you'd like to watch it, would encourage you to. It goes on to explain MMB's MIMBA strategy, and it's definitely worth watching the full video. But at this point, we're running a little bit short on time. I think we need to play catch up. So I'm going to ask all of our next 3 speakers to be quite brief in their introductions so that we can make sure to save time for interactive discussion. But this is a perfect segue to introducing our next panelist, Professor Francine Ntumi, a renowned scientist who's devoted so much of her life's work to malaria research. Francine, welcome. Can you please tell us about your experience as a woman scientist? What are the barriers you've faced and the progress that you've seen and the progress that you've led? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you for inviting me to attend this meeting. As a female African scientist, what I've seen some progress, today there are 31% of female scientists in Africa, but, with a disparity, and I'm coming from Central Africa, from Republic of Congo, and the proportion is 12%. So you see that the challenge is really there. But, we now, after time, I came back 15 years ago, and we started to put in place a program of Women in Science, and really to raise this issue. And today I see some progress, and not only in Congo, but in many countries in Africa, with some program like UNESCO, L'Oréal, African Union, and other program where visibility is set on successful female scientists. And also we see more female at leading position in Gabon, in Cameroon, even in Congo, chancellor, vice chancellor, head of research institutions, more female in STEM. Even it's still, the critical mass is not there, but the movement is on the way, I think. And as mentioned rightly by Begonia, she told everything, that no culture, the challenges are huge, no culture of research. The environment is challenging here in Africa. To do research is not attractive for male. So for a female, you may think it's not attractive, and bad stereotypes on female scientists, but things are changing with putting the light on a role model. And we need also to set up strong local partnership. That's also something we are working on, and to encourage girls from younger age. So that's what I can say from now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for all you've done and all you continue to build there. We'll come back to you in a minute. 2 more speakers I'd like to introduce. Please next to welcome Dr. Marcela Lenkova, head of the Center for Gender and Science and the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences. Marcela, you're an expert on the role of research funding organizations in tackling gender equality. Who's leading the way in this space? What are they doing right? What would you like them to do more or see more of? Again, this is probably pretty loaded questions, but if you could give us some high-level thinking on this, and we'll dive in further in the Q&A.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a huge pleasure to be here and to contribute to this panel discussion. And first of all, congratulations to DSW on the new report and highlighting the need for the intersectional lens on gender issues, gender research, because this is something that we are definitely not seeing enough of, even though we know it's necessary. So this is definitely one of the things that needs highlighting. I want to start by saying that I think we all agree that research funding organizations play really a crucial role in the entire research and innovation system, because research funding from the RFOs constitutes huge proportions of institutional funding, but also salaries. So we can say that research careers really depend on one's success in obtaining research funding from research funding organizations. And so given this importance, the research funders have been called, at least since 2015, on supporting women's careers, eliminating gender bias, and integrating gender dimension in research. And I think that these are some of the areas where we really need to move forward, and we're not seeing enough of it. When we look at the three main areas where research funders act, it's the distribution of resources in the research and innovation systems, scientific evaluation of proposals, and monitoring and evaluation of the funded projects. And in all of these dimensions, it's imperative that concrete actions are taken, not only in terms of the working conditions and research careers, but also the integration of the gender dimension in research. And we are really still at the starting stages of all of this. We have very little, and I have to say that, for example, with some of the actions that the Commission is taking in Horizon Europe, it's really leading the way, but we're not seeing enough at the member state level. And so when we look at the research careers, the research funders have responsibility to act in terms of gender bias in research evaluation. And this goes to the individual level through training and raising awareness. And we can really see some RFOs moving forward, for example, in Spain, but also other countries and Sweden. Also, Netherlands is moving forward, Ireland. This is tied to the fact that we need to see gender balance on the evaluation committees and other bodies. And again, this is something we know might help eliminate gender bias. But again, we are seeing very little in terms of concrete actions or quotas even for the representation of these bodies. And the second thing is the working conditions. And here I'm really specifically referring to the gender pay gap and pay transparency and ensuring decent remuneration. And we know that for many early career researchers and doctoral fellows, this is an absolute critical issue. Decent remuneration and gender pay gap that needs to be tackled. And then we have heard so much about the gender dimension in research and innovation, so I will not go into this in detail, but really I think that we need to make clear to the research funders that they have responsibility to society and that that public funding cannot go to funding research that benefits only half of the population, and that we need to address intersectionality as part of this. And I want to mention one last thing that is really not been on the agenda, is slowly coming to that. It has been already mentioned, but the role of RFOs in this is really very uncertain at the moment. And it's gender-based violence and sexual harassment as one form of gender-based violence. And we are just starting this debate in the EU, what role RFOs have, but they need to have measures in place to ensure that funding does not go to predators, that funding does not go to people who commit violence, who take advantage of power imbalances between principal investigators and early career researchers and doctoral fellows, people in research sites, remote research sites, etc. And so this needs to be addressed. And I think it's one of the critical issues that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
So much to follow up there. We will come back to you in a minute, but I would like to introduce, last but not least, Zulema Altamirano Argudo, advisor to the cabinet of the Minister of Science and Innovation at the Ministry of Science and Innovation in Spain. Zulema, can you tell us a bit more about what Spain is doing to foster gender equality in R&I?
I will do so. Thank you so much for your invitation, and apologies on behalf of the Secretary General of Research, Raquel Llotis, he could not be here. So me as the director of the Women in Science Unit, I will be just providing with the view what we are doing in Spain, but I have the feeling that I'm going to be summarizing everything that have been already said. On our side, our starting point when approaching this strategy was to what is not advancing in gender equality is going backward. Okay, and for going forward, what we needed to make it visible, to make gender inequalities visible, to make it possible, to transform the cultural and institutional change we need, and to make it happen. So we start with making it visible from the unit I'm directing, I'm head of. What we are doing is provide data and base our policies in data, or not only on the what, how the situation is that have been already shown, but also the why. So, for instance, we have this report on the situation of young female scientists in Spain to show some of the key issues that we need to tackle and we need to provide an answer to. No? And this is the same with the She figures. No? But at EU member state in Spain, we have scientists women in figures. We have now, it's going to be released next month. So with that, we have a clear diagnosis and also evaluation how situation is moving to adjust our policies. To make visible what we are is putting a lot of effort in make visible the contribution of women in science and women in innovation. We have an online platform with 310 women, has been really updated this weekend, showing how wonderful, how much talent we have also with women. No, that's they're a reference for all the new generations, and it's also not only a matter of justice, but also we need them. No, we need to show them because they are not visible. To make it possible, what we needed was a law. So what we did last year was to reinforce our law with the gender perspective. We have now, with this security law, the gender perspective is integrated in the whole law with 2 articles, and in these articles there are quite strong measures. For instance, in line with what is done at EU level, it's compulsory to have gender equality plans and protocols against sexual harassment and harassment based on gender. So we believe that this is really important. So this is already, it's not only for research organization, but also funding research organizations. It's all the agencies in the system. They need to have them. It is also compulsory to take measures to avoid gender bias in selection and evaluation processes. Gender balance is needed in those committees and tribunals, no, but we also need to tackle that. And also it's compulsory to integrate gender dimension in projects, as we have already been explained before. So there is another article specifically on positive actions with an examples of very different positive actions that we know, because based on evidence that they can support and they can provide a response, they can tackle the gender inequalities we are still having for women, no, and for gender equality in research. And now it is making it happen. So it's not only to have it by law, that is okay, but it's not enough. We need good structures on gender equality. There's been already said how important network is, how important is to provide our women in science with this network, with a stronger structure, with these gender equality plans and protocols. And for that, I would like to highlight 2 key projects we are now developing. One of them is this distinction, this award, that is acknowledging research institutions, also universities, that they are integrating gender equality as part of the excellence in their policies, in their views, including gender dimension, and also a mentorship program. Because we saw in this report for young scientific women in science that they didn't have enough information to carry on their career. So it's one of the reasons why they abandoned. Another one is also work-life balance. But what we are now is we identify we did a mapping all around Spain with all these mentorship programs in research and innovation. And this last week, with the 11th of February, we released guidelines with all this description of the different programs and with some recommendations. That is the first step for the next one that is going to be like a common framework with this network supporting women, but not only women, also men, that they need these mentorship programs, but we will want to integrate gender dimension in these programs for them to be aware, especially mentors, how important, how difficult this might be different for women, because of not because we are different, because the social issues around us that is affecting women in research especially. So that's all for me. I don't want to take more time. I will be happy to answer any question. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you. So now we really do want to hear from everyone in our audience. To open the floor here for interactive discussion, I'm going to ask our facilitators to put a spotlight on all of our speakers, Lisa, Francine, Marcella, Katya, have everyone here for the panel discussion. And maybe what I'll start, I saw that there was one question that was already answered in the chat, but let's come back to it. Someone in the audience asked, what do you think that positive discrimination, or do you think that positive discrimination should be a way to increase female leadership in science? And Francine already jumped in and responded in written format saying yes, in some places, because culturally women are really hesitant to show their competencies, to put themselves at the top in contrary to men, and therefore to set up this positive discrimination will contribute to having more females at top positions. Do you want to say anything more about that, Francine, and sort of what you're seeing or how that's coming into effect where you're located?
No, exactly. And what I think Zulema also called the active actions. So in some places I see here from Congo, from Africa, culturally, the woman is behind the man. So it's not appreciated that, a female ambition, to be ambitious for a female, it's negative. For a male, it's positive. So this is, and for a female, so to apply for a leadership position, it's difficult, really difficult. But so if these countries set up some, some positive discrimination to force these female with all the competencies and the skills to take the role, I think with time we will have more female applying and playing the key role. So I think it's something really, we culturally, we are only full of doubt. We are not sure what we are doing. We want to be perfect, but for the men, they apply, and if it's not perfect, they have tried. But for female, so culturally and also as a female behavior, we are not used to be on the front line. So we need to assist female to be on the front line.
Perfect, thank you. I have another question here. This one, Katya, over to you. How is the EC, I mean, we talked about the policy changes and the structures and the structural changes that need to happen, the systemic changes that need to happen. At an EC level, how is the EC considering intersectionality in its approach, moving away from the binary considerations of male and female, but also thinking about how gender intersects with other levers of discrimination, such as age, race, sexual orientation, etc.?
Yes, I mean, for a very administrative and technological start, there is now for the registration of participants in Horizon Europe, besides the usual male-female, also a non-binary box to tick, but preciously little people choose to do so. That I have no statistics, of course, but for my sense, there are many people who just don't dare to kind of tick that as well, but we will see. No, but besides the very technocratic tick box questions, that is an issue that we need to address. We started last year already with a report, a study, which came out that looked exactly into intersectionality and analyzed a number of elements, came up with, well, proposals, what member states and their research ministries and research funders and research bodies and so on could do. But one of the findings is that we're really lacking data, frankly speaking. And so in the European Union's new European research area policy agenda, sorry for the very, very long name, but this is a multi-annual policy strategy if you want to promote research and innovation throughout the European Union. There is one action that relates to gender equality, and nota bene, it's inclusive gender equality. So we stressed really the point that we need to look a little bit wider than the usual binary view on things. And together with the member states, we hope to develop until 2024 more concrete steps with the member states to actually promote that and bring that on the agenda. And Begoña very eloquently in her introduction pointed out that the research and innovation also needs to be relevant for society. And let me put it this way: if you are a disabled, ethnically non-mainstream white European woman, the world looks significantly different than when you're a disabled man, for instance, and so on and so on. So there are really factors that superpose and impact in a tremendous way on people's lives, but yet they're part of society. Just looking at disability, there are very large numbers of society of people who are with disabilities, and the ethnic background anyway is a total hodgepodge and mix inside the European Union and many other countries. So overlooking that and doing as if there was nothing really brings us nowhere and makes ultimately a lot of the research and innovation that we're funding not so relevant, because there are not so many middle-aged, healthy-bodied white men who are potential customers. So let me leave it there. So in brief, we're working on it.
Lots to work on. You know, Zulema, coming back to you, you were talking about in Spain, the evidence generation piece, and Katja was just talking about the lack of evidence there. I'm just wondering from sort of the best practices of what you've learned in Spain, what are, you know, one or two of those best practices of where to start for other countries, for other stakeholders that are really trying to dig into making these policy changes? And it sounds like the evidence might be the backbone to support that.
I remember the pool that you were doing. That's the second question. Is that I think it's the first thing is to have it by law, to make it possible. It can be by an act or a strategy that is mainstreaming the whole. In our case, is the whole ministry, but all the agencies are working on research and innovation. So they have it there. They have it in the paper. They know that they are supposed to do it, and then it's okay. We need a structure to advise. In our case, for instance, the Women and Science Unit is something quite unique. It is at the highest level in the ministry. That is also very important. Is we are open to provide any advice, any piece of support and information, anything is needed. And we did since the very beginning is to reinforce our training and capacity building, to make sure that one, we have the network, and second, we have people at the first line that they know what to do and how to do it. So it's first to be aware. This is very important, the awareness raising. To be aware is why we are talking about this based on data. It's not an opinion, it's the data are like that. We always see the glass half full, not half empty, but there's still room for improvement. And what can we do? Here at the top level, at the ministry, we can do this. And we have all these strategies and all these measures. But then in the research organizations, in the research funding organizations, they can do things, and we are here to first telling them what they should be doing and then how to do it. I think this, if I had to make it short, this will be the two things. No, this is what we are supposed to do, and here we are to guide you in doing it. So, and third, the follow-up, please, the follow-up. So it's okay, we have it in paper. We are telling everyone we are doing it. Okay, after 1 year, that's why our gender equality plans, they are compulsory. The evaluation is compulsory yearly.
That's really interesting. I've heard some stakeholders say that sometimes working on the gender and innovation alignment is extra work stream, as opposed to talking about really it should be part and parcel of everybody's day-to-day work. So really important point there. I'm going to go back to a financing question we have in the chat, and then Lisa, stay tuned. I'm coming back to you as well to talk about the research agenda here in a minute. But in the chat, we've got a question. Taking sex and gender into consideration throughout the R&I cycle comes with additional costs. Are funders making money available to help researchers overcome this hurdle? Marcela, I think I'd like you to take point on answering that, and others can chime in. I'd like to layer onto that question. Are you seeing also a difference between, say, public sector funding versus philanthropy or other types of funders of this work as well?
Okay, so I'm not aware of a study that would do a comparison between the private and public, but what can be said is that sometimes the private sector funders, philanthropies, are taking, let's say, more liberal in some instances or more comprehensive approach to things, being aware and wanting to really do cutting edge. And that might also pertain to, for example, research assessment and not doing, what we now know is an effective way of assessing research through all the impact factor H index and all of this that we are now disputing and finding new ways in Europe. So some of them have moved away from that as well. And, this has also gender dimensions. So but I'm not aware of a study on the gender dimension in research per se. Regarding this question, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we have now a lot of research where data is collected, let's say in a binary system, male, female, not necessarily including other dimensions, but at least, collecting female, male data. And yet you have the data, you don't analyze and you don't publish on this. So this is complete waste of money. So even if the researchers collect the data, they don't analyze it. I think that it's not only about supporting financially the researchers to do this, but really insisting that you have to do it from the start. And when we look at, for example, the introduction of measures in the Canadian Institutes of Health, I don't know, it's already at least 5 years ago, maybe even more, insisting that it's not only going to be clinical trials and the animal testing, but also cell lines that need to be female, male. There was so much uproar. It's going to cost too much. We don't have the cell lines, etc. It needs, it will cost so much money to produce. And what happened? Everyone can live with that, right? I mean, it takes time, it takes adjustment, but it can be done. You don't retract from that procedure. And so I really think that the money does not necessarily need to go in if we insist that everyone does it. Because now we have researchers who are very responsible and are already introducing gender dimension, paying attention to this. So they're already as if investing now. So, let's just have everyone do that and have research funders insist that this needs to be done. And I really want to underline what Zulema was saying, because I think it's one of the major issues that we have in gender equality policy, and it's the lack of monitoring and evaluation. We introduce measures and nothing happens. And we've seen it time and again in the EU. It's probably true elsewhere. We introduce measures, we don't follow up. If we don't keep the research teams, the research institutions accountable to what is on paper, they get used to the fact that nothing happens. So that's why I think it's so critical now with the Commission legal checks for gender equality plans to really set a system that will communicate to the organizations that it's not enough to have things on paper, and the same for everything else. We really need to follow through with monitoring and evaluation.
Perfect. Thank you. Pivoting back to how does the gender intentional approach come into the product development, the R&D of the tools we need? Lisa, you started talking very, very briefly in your intro about the recommendations from today's report, but I'm wondering if you can just go a little bit deeper into those, talking through, what are some of the key takeaways about how do you really shift the paradigm for making sure that, the example you brought up about women, diagnostics not designed for women. I mean, that's just so striking, right? As we come out of whatever version of COVID we're living in now, it's just a huge gap. So what do we need to do from a product development, research and innovation angle to start to correct for some of those things?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Not just diagnostics, also because you mentioned coming out of COVID. What about all the personal protection equipment that we had worldwide, which were mostly designed for male bodies, but with a majorly female global health workforce? So I think that these examples really show why we need to integrate gender considerations at every single step of the research and innovation cycle. Many things were already mentioned in the discussion, so I'm trying to focus a bit and not repeat. But because it's really at so many different levels. That's why we created this summary graph, because it's about making sure, the example that Marcella mentioned from Canada, that there are not just male cells in vitro studies, in medical research, basic research, but that you make sure there's a 50-50%. There are also calls for overrepresentation of females in some studies, depending on prevalence of disease. I think there are also no guidelines yet on how to best implement this, or what would be actually the most reasonable approach, or the one that would lead us to the safest tools. I wanted to come back, and it's also part of our recommendations, to the need for funding. I agree with Marcella that probably, I think there are systemic issues that don't require, in the long run, so much additional funding, but probably an initial investment in terms of capacity building. So in order for all the institutions to become more gender aware, and what does it mean, and at which level, and which points? I mean, one of my favorite examples of how where people don't see the impact of gender sensitive policies. If in a city, for example, there's a lot of snow, and first the big roads are cleared that men use to go to work, but the smaller roads that women use to bring children to caretaking facilities, then women are impacted by the snow much more than the men are. And it's a public policy that decides which roads are cleared first. And I think this is a good example that shows how feminists, even people working in gender equality, like I've been for many years, but still when somebody gave this example, I was, okay, yes, true, I didn't think about that. So initial investments in capacity building in research funding institutions, in research implementing institutions, will be needed to create the tools that we need. But then in the long run, I think it's not necessarily more investment. We just need to make sure that the funding that is out there, part of it at least, is dedicated to research topics that also really focus on gender topics, not just as an element or a mandatory element, but really are the focus of the research topic. And I wanted to quickly answer the question that I saw in the chat, if any policymakers have received or how they received the study. And I must say that in the past 2.5 years, because this is an update of the study, right? We had so many really good conversations. And I mean, the fact that we can welcome the European Commission here today, and that the Commissioner even sent a message, it really shows, and member state representatives, there are champions out there amongst policymakers that are really trying to make a difference in fostering change. So both among policymakers, funders, philanthropies, but also fellow NGOs, the study has been received very, very positively and with like open arms. But then, this webinar is to have one more step maybe towards implementing the change. And I think that will be a long process, carrying messages and all the recommendations from all the speakers here today into the different organizations. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks for jumping in the chat and answering that. I'm also interested, Francine, on getting your impressions here. I've had some colleagues we work in policy and advocacy at GHTC, as does DSW, and some of the conversations that are coming up in the global ecosystem beyond R&I are thinking about frontline health workers. And some are saying that frontline health workers around the world have the worst working conditions, and that, of course, they're disproportionately women, and that women are working actually to get into the clinical research space to get into a better spot. And then we're talking today, Begonia's remarks, we're saying, well, women researchers have a really tough life in the clinical research space and they're moving to another spot. You work with everyone. And so I'm really curious to sort of see, how do you think about these workforce issues at a macro level? How do we think about systemic change where every level of the workforce has gender inclusion, has the right conditions? I mean, we can't just completely live in a silo here. So how do we think about that broader ecosystem, fostering the R&I workforce innovation that we of course care about, but then also making sure we're not losing them somewhere else, and we're not losing workforce, frontline health workers completely into clinical.
Okay, so thank you. Very quickly, I would say from Africa, I would say the many institutions have no gender equality plan. So the gender dimension is something, I would say even a little bit virtual. If the African Union or if the European Commission wants something nicely written, yeah, it will be done. But in fact, it does not, reach the institution, the hospitals and the universities. There's no gender equality plan at all. So I think the first thing would be really to start to think that, okay, it's possible to do something. But from Congo, that's not true in terms that for violence to women, now there is a law and women are protected. So things are moving forward. Okay, but for me, the fight is to have really in all institutions to really address this point. And then from there, it will be easier to adapt to the context also, what will be the best development of plan, because the plan developed in Europe will not fit the plan elaborated in Congo. So to have something well articulated which protects women and girls, absolutely. So for me, the first challenge will be this one, to really have at national level and at each institution, at the university, in research institutions. I made an investigation some years ago in Central Africa, and no institutions have a gender equality plan. And so I'm not sure in 2023 that it has changed. So for me, that will be the first challenge, to have that in place.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to leave that as your final word. We have less than 5 minutes left before we need to wrap up. So I'm going to ask everyone to give a final thought building on what Francine just said. And also balancing with Begonia, who said we can't just work on one thing, but what is top of mind for your respective roles as you leave today's call, as you think about the work ahead, just in a quick sentence? And then what is your advice for those of us who do work in the policy and advocacy space about how can we keep pushing, turning that ship slowly, but making sure that we're continuing to make progress, even if it's not as fast as what all we would like to see in gender in the workforce and R&I agenda. Katja, I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, maybe a personal quick pickup which I took. I loved what Zulema was saying. What's not advancing is going backwards. And I think that's my personal takeaway. That, I mean, we got in the European Union, and with what the European Commission does, we got quite a far way, but we need to press on. And really collecting data, analyzing data is very, very important. And I think Marcella was recalling that with the gender equality plans now being a condition to access Horizon Europe funding, we really want to get serious. And for anyone who is listening, if you want to have real problems, then you mess it up with the auditors of the European Commission. So watch it. Don't just keep gender equality plans a piece of paper, but implement them. And it's not mind-boggling, shattering your entire world assumptions and so on. Hang on, we live in the 21st century. Come on. So get real and get it done. Let me just put one little word more on one of the questions which came in regarding, but doesn't it cost much more money to do sex and gender related research? Let me inverse the question. are you sure that it's not a waste of money if you purely base your things on male? It can render, in particular in the medical fields, or when it comes to protection against pollution and chemical things, it can render the entire expensive research useless. So yes, it has to be there. And I want to close on that. Thank you very much.
Well said. Marcella, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for all these great points. I think, for me personally, the issue of gender-based violence in academia is really at forefront, and we're now, I think, in a really good spot at the EU level, but also in the member states. And so I see huge opportunity for moving this forward. So I feel really encouraged about that. And then I will repeat again, monitoring and evaluation. If we don't follow through, I think that this should be at the crux of what we endeavor together between the policymakers, the gender scholars, and researchers on the ground. I think that we need to come together and also develop the methodologies for monitoring and evaluation, making sure that we cover all the bases. So this would be from me. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks. Zulema.
I've already said many things, so I will just change a little bit my approach. For me, the first thing will be not to leave anyone behind. We need all the talent. Science is the core of the future of us. We have already seen with the pandemic and everything. So we need to make sure that science is attracted for them, for the new generation, especially for women. Once that they join scientist career, to assure that there is a stable career and well-paid career. It's not something vocational without having a normal work, and then to assure that they are part of it. That is, to be part of it is very important, in line with the discrimination rate of any different issues. Diversity is key there. And last but not least, to assure that the benefit of science is also for them, is for half of the population and for all these intersectionalities. So that will be these four current things, yes, to assure this our policy making activities.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Lisa, last word to you.
I feel like I already had a last word, but maybe I emphasize the importance of gender dimension in regulatory affairs and also regulatory harmonization efforts worldwide, because if regulators make it mandatory to have gender sensitive tools and to have all the documentation of medical tools in their development that gender has been taken into account, then it would be a big waste of money to not do that during the whole development process, because then your tool cannot come to the market.
Perfect. Evidence, partnerships, inclusion, thinking about the science and the research that's advanced, but how that's supported by the laws, the policies, the regulatory frameworks, all of the things. And I think we should go end where we started with Begonia, saying we can't just work on one piece of it. Some of us may spend more time working on pieces of it as individuals or as individual organizations, but we need to look at the collective whole if we're going to see this meaningful change. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for dialing in, again, around the world. Thanks for getting up early or staying up late with us today. A tremendous thank you to all of our incredible female scientists and policymakers who anchored today's discussion. Congratulations to DSW for the report launch today. I can't wait to see it in more detail. I'm sure others will as well. And I'll encourage everyone to look at the links in the chat to spend a bit more time. And just again, this is a moment in time where we stop and reflect on these topics, but we have so much further to go. So with that, I wish you all a safe and healthy rest of your week. And thanks for dialing in. Take care.